Okay, welcome one and all to the League of Women Voters First Friday on the second Friday. The moderator this morning or this afternoon will be Carlin Reed, and I'll be managing the chat box. So Carlin, take it away.
Thanks, Diane. Hi, Carlin Reed for the League. Today we're going to be looking at Article 33, the zoning map and Thoreau Depot Business District article that will be on town meeting coming up on May 1st. We have two excellent speakers to address some of the issues that have arisen on this. Our first speaker is going to be Burton Flint, the chair of the Concord Planning Board. He'll present the article. And then we'll also have Carol Savoy talk about some of the community reactions to the plans. She's the chair of the Save Thoreau organization. Just very briefly, some information about the sequence of how today's program is going to be run. As soon as I'm done with this little welcome speech, I'll turn this over to Burton, and he will give about a 20-minute talk. He's got a slide deck to show you about Article 3. Then we're going to look at Carol's slides. She's got another 20 minutes, and she'll give her perspective on the Save Thoreau point of view. And after that, I'm going to open up to audience questions. And at this point, I'll be engaging with Diane about looking at questions from the chat box. If you have questions, feel free to put in the chat box. We'll also take raised hands, which is that raised hand function that you have at the bottom of your screen or top of the screen, whichever, depending on what type of screen you have. But we'll take audience questions as well. And then at the very end, we'll do last words, Burton first for 2 minutes, and then Carol for 2 minutes. Then we'll do a league wrap up with some announcements. So I've already saved 3 minutes off my plan time. We're about ready to go, folks. All right, Burton Flint, you're on. Go ahead.
Thank you, Carlin. I might need to reclaim your 3 minutes. Let me go ahead and start my presentation. 1 second. Okay, and I presume you can see that now. So thank you, Diane. Thank you, Carlin. Thank you to the League for this chance to provide additional information on Article 33. The town meeting vote on this is a culmination of an almost 3-year-long process. We've had public forums, public hearings, and many, many meetings of the planning board. But despite all that, I think given the complexity of this zoning proposal, there's still a clear need to educate town citizens, and I really appreciate the League's role in doing that. Let's see, how do I advance? There we go. All right, so first, what are we talking about generally? This is the Thoreau Depot Business District. It's an existing zoning overlay district that provides special zoning rules for the area around the intersection of Thoreau Street and Sudbury Road, essentially what's historically a train station and freight depot, and some surrounding businesses. And this illustration shows the district as it appears today. It's primarily commercial buildings surrounded by parking areas with a very small amount of green space, mostly parking lot islands. There's a few residential buildings over on the left-hand side, one mixed-use development that's businesses and residential at Crosby Crossing. It's important to understand, in understanding why the planning board is proposing Article 32, it's important to understand the planning process in Concord. So every 10 years, Concord develops a long-range plan through an extensive multi-year public engagement process. And this slide shows some of the town goals identified in the current 2030 plan. The planning board is tasked with approximately 55 action items that are intended in part to implement these goals and others in the plan. The 2030 plan, as well as Concord's 2015 housing production plan, specifically direct the planning board to revise the Thoreau Depot zoning. So that's what we're responding to as a committee. The 2030 plan identified that Concord's population is changing. While the number of households in Concord has increased, household size has declined. There's more empty nesters. The over 65 population is increasing, and while the number of kids is decreasing. It's projected by 2030, 34% of Concord's population will be 65 years old or older, up from 20% in 2010. And the school-age population will decrease to 14% of the population, down from 20% in 2010. So these trends have significant implications for what our housing, transportation, and service needs will be in the future. And with these things in mind, the planning board got to work turning the objectives we were tasked with in the long-range plan into specific zoning proposal that I'm providing information on today. So what's being proposed? In a nutshell, the big point is we're proposing to revise the district zoning to help shape future development, to make it more likely that when property in the district is eventually redeveloped, mixed-use development with housing will be on the table. I want to emphasize there's no current development proposal to redevelop any property in the district at this time, and Article 33 is intended to shape what may be proposed in the future. But again, there's no current development plan to replace any buildings or business in the district today. Right. So first of all, point one, prohibit some uses that are allowed today. There's for each zoning district, there's a table of uses with a long list of different things that are either allowed or disallowed. We are removing some of the things that are allowed. So no car dealerships or boat dealerships, no additional gas stations, no professional offices on the first floor of the commercial buildings lining the streets. Point two, we're lowering the maximum height allowed for pitched roofs, but we're allowing a somewhat higher height by special permit under limited circumstances. And that's a big issue, and I'll go into that in more detail. We are prohibiting parking in the front yard setbacks. We've got some different dimensional requirements that I'll go into detail on. But the idea is moving the cars so you don't have parking out front in a strip mall style. And we're reducing affordable housing requirements for smaller projects and specifying affordability limits. I'll also go into that in more detail. We are reducing the open space requirement for mixed use projects. So again, for projects that have housing in them, and we're requiring functional, publicly accessible open space. We're proposing to reduce the residential parking requirements for mixed use projects to align with the needs of 1 and 2 bedroom units near public transit. And lastly, we're providing design guidelines, so new development better reflects the architectural styles in Concord. All right, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. So again, the board's objective with this proposal is to help create the opportunity in the district for mixed-use development with housing. The existing zoning allows for mixed-use development. It's called the combined business residential use. So this can be theoretically built in the district today, but in the aggregate, there are really 3 primary requirements for mixed use that make it difficult to actually bring housing into the mix if you were to redevelop in the district today. One of the first things is an existing provision that if you do have mixed use, all buildings on the lot must be mixed use, combined housing and commercial. There are a few large lots, primarily the Crosby's lot and where the CVS is located, that might not make sense. You might want commercial buildings close to the street, shops and storefronts, and residential behind, or you might want a large commercial building behind a residential commercial mixed use development. So we're proposing that along the public street, we allow ground floor commercial, but you could have single use buildings further back on the back of the lot. There's an existing requirement that developments for 4 or more units, 20% of the units must be affordable. Now, our goal is to create more housing, and a general planning board goal is to create the opportunity for more affordable housing. But the fact is, no affordable housing is being built under the current requirements, and that shows that something's not working. And having seen this play out before the planning board and other types of projects around town, the problem is that the economics don't work for smaller projects. There's no affordability requirement for less than 4, you build 4, you get 20% of the units must be affordable. We want to create more of a curve to the affordability requirement. So for projects with 5 to 10 units, 10% would need to be affordable. And we're defining what we mean by affordable, which isn't currently defined. That would be affordable to people making 80% of the area median income. What that means is that housing would go on to the subsidized housing inventory, which for folks who follow 40B issues is a key thing in terms of tracking how many affordable units we have. And then for projects with greater than 10 units, we would still maintain that 20% affordability requirements, but define that half would need to be would need to meet that 80% of AMI, and the other half would be 150% of AMI. We're also requiring that if you're building, let's say a mixed use development with a mix of 1 to 3 bedroom units, your affordable units must be in the same ratio of 1 to 3 bedrooms. So you don't just get a bunch of little studio apartments counting as your affordable units. Let's okay, and another existing provision, which is really, I think, a hindrance to the creation of mixed use, is the open space requirement. So today, there's a requirement that 2 times the gross floor area, the open space must be equal to 2 times the gross floor area of the residential portion, that can be reduced by a special permit. And so if you think about that, if you're building, let's just say you're building a 2-story building with commercial on the ground floor, and the entire second floor is residential. Right away, that means that you've got parking. You take the remaining space, you need to divide that into thirds, because you need 2x your floor space of your residential. So right away, you're only building on probably less than a quarter of the lot. That doesn't really work for most of the lots in the Thorough District. And it's my belief this is probably the biggest impediment to mixed use. So we're changing it to say that if you have a mixed use development, 15% of the lot needs to be open space. So that the idea is to create outdoor open space to go along with the residential portion. If you look today at the district, there really isn't any open space except for like I said, some parking medians and a little bit of open space around the Concord crossing. And the reason for that, there's no open space, is because there's no residential in the district really to speak of. It's commercial. So people see that we're proposing to reduce the amount of the open space requirement, but if this reduced requirement creates the opportunity for residential and mixed use developments, it will, because of the existing conditions, that will require an increase in open space that exists today. All right, we're also looking at changing some of the dimensional requirements. So first, where the building can go on the lot. Today, there's just a rear setback requirement, but we're proposing to have front setback requirements. So we define 2 streets, a primary and a secondary street. The primary street being Sudbury, the secondary street being Thoreau. For the primary street, which we envision having a wider sort of boulevard feel, there's a minimum setback of 12 feet and a maximum setback of 20 feet. The idea is, again, no parking's going in front. So things that would be going in front would be public plazas, maybe tables for restaurants or plantings. But then along Thoreau Street with that 0 to 12 foot setback, the idea would be that the buildings create a street wall and meet the street. Some examples of that today, that's like Concord Provisions, Karma, Framables that are right on the street forming that wall. But there's some gaps in that wall today on Thoreau Street. Then we want to change some of the building dimensional requirements for the actual structures of the building. So today in the district, there's a cap on height of 35 feet, though you can go to 40 feet with a special permit. It's important to appreciate, however, that 35-foot measurement, for a flat roof, it's easy. It's to the top of the flat roof. For a pitched roof, it's the midpoint of the slope portion of the roof, of that hypotenuse on the roof. So depending upon the size of the roof, that can actually go significantly higher than 35 feet. You can imagine if the midpoint is 35 feet, by default, the top of the roof, the ridge line has to be above 35 feet. What we're saying is, instead of having that sort of variable calculation, that there be a fixed maximum 38-foot portion for the ridge line. You'll see here, this is the table straight out of the proposed article. There's a lot of references in here to the Thoreau Depot, the TBD Design Guidelines section. I'll talk about those in a little bit, but it's essentially, you'll see a lot of different elements of the buildings here: building orientation, neighboring context, ground floor glazings or windows, the vertical facade, horizontal modulation. Those are all things that there's no requirements around today. And what we're proposing in design guidelines that would be developed by the board, we have draft guidelines, but reviewed through planning board meetings, create design guidelines that would start to define those things in the district for the first time. Now, this has been a really hot button issue in a lot of our public hearings, forums, and the like, the idea that we're going to be increasing the height. And in fact, by special permit, I said today you can go to 40 feet. And what we're proposing is that by special permit, you could go to 40 feet for a flat roof or 45 feet for a pitched roof. Again, you don't have that variable potential of going significantly higher than 45 feet to the ridge line using that 40-foot calculation for a pitched roof. But we're fixing it at 45. And for the first time, we're putting in restrictions on where you can go to that height under a special permit. Today, it's throughout the district. But what we're saying is it's got to be at least 125 feet from a residential district, and it's got to be 100 feet from the lot line. And because of that front setback, that would necessitate the front setback requirement, that would necessitate that there be another building in front of the taller building built under special permit between the public right of way and that building. So we're significantly constraining where you could go have increased height by special permit. Parking requirements. Okay, so I already spoke about how in the front yard, we want to move cars out of the front yard setback. So instead of parking in front of businesses, parking would be to the side or behind businesses, ideally behind. And the parking requirements for any given project would be based upon the number of units for the residential portion, the square footage for commercial, which is how it's done today. But we want to make the change that instead of requiring 2 parking spaces for each residential unit, regardless of the number of bedrooms, we would have 1 parking space required for 1 and 2 bedroom units and 2 for anything larger than that. I think the idea being you're here ideally near a transit station, or you're near the train station, and ideally be making use of that, or it would be for smaller families that only need 1 car if you're in a 1 or 2 bedroom unit. Okay, design guidelines. We don't have design guidelines today, and what the zoning article brings in for consideration for the first time for this district design guidelines. These are some pictures that illustrate buildings that I guess don't they fit in with Concord. Some people might like the looks of them, but parking out front, sort of glass and brick boxes. The idea through our public forums, there was definitely a particular preference for a design vernacular, which reflects New England, the Concord's style, and sort of a New England style. And so our design guidelines are built around that. So instead of buildings that look like this, you're getting buildings more along the lines of what's depicted in these schematics, which is pitched roofs with dormers, smaller modulated fronts that are not sort of landscrapers taking up entire blocks, but they're divided up, and they're moving out to meet the street or with a front yard as opposed to having the parking in front. All right, where am I now? These are some more examples. So within the design guidelines, if you've got a building that's over 60 feet, you need to break up the building so it appears in sort of smaller pieces. The maximum length of a building would be 100 feet, and it would be broken up like this. You've got these glazing or window requirements, so you've got sort of a ground floor that opens itself out onto the street, and so forth. One other element of the proposal is to align the depot boundary with the property lines as they exist today that are commercial. So what we're looking at here is the portion that's outlined in red there is essentially the southerly portion of the Crosby's parking lot. The large building on that lot is the Crosby's and Ace Hardware, and about half their parking lot is actually in Residence B. And because we want this zoning to apply to all of the land that's currently under commercial use in the district, we are proposing to expand the Thoreau Depot Business District as a zoning overlay to include that portion of the existing lot. So it aligns with the lot line. So it would look like this. Okay. Okay, just in summary, as I said before, our intent is that in the aggregate, these changes would make it more likely that in the future we'd see more mixed-use development with housing, meaning more people living in the district. And yes, some buildings that are currently 1 story could one day be redeveloped into a 2 or 3 story building, but in a design language that reflects the neighborhood and could result in some actual affordable housing and public open space being created. had a lot of questions about how much development would actually occur under this. When we were working through this sort of charrette process of working on these new zoning, the outside consultant we worked with from the MAPC, excuse me, had come up with some hypothetical maximum build outs that showed up to 60 units being built on the Crosby's and CVS parcels, and had come up with a number also along Thoreau Street. But those were essentially hypotheticals, and it's important to note that any future development, there's a number of factors which would determine the ultimate density. So on a particular lot, it would be the number of stories of the building, the amount of parking based upon the required use. So office space has different requirements for parking than residence or retail. The amount of open space based upon the formula that we've developed, the required setbacks, the mix of residential versus commercial, structured versus street surface parking, and the overall site geometry. So it's quite difficult to say actually what the total build out could or would be, or frankly, whether there would be any significant changes. Our hope, though, is that it would result in more changes. So if the residents of Concord support this rezoning, down the road, it's important to know that future planning boards have the opportunity to do site plan reviews of any project that's proposed. And at that time, traffic studies will be performed, sewer capacity will be assessed, costs of the towns will be looked at, stormwater engineering would be required, plans would be reviewed to ensure conformance with parking requirements and public amenities and the design. And all of these things would happen through a site plan review process, which would happen down the road. So thank you for the opportunity to present this, and I look forward to your questions after Carol's presentation.
Great, thank you, Burton. Would you please stop sharing? There we go. That's good. Okay, before we do Carol's, I've got to read this little announcement here. I meant to do this earlier. My apologies for the interruption on this. This meeting is being recorded by the League and it is the property of the League. When aired, posted, or otherwise distributed, the recording must be presented in its entirety, with the exception that excerpts may be provided by the League to news media reporting on the event. No part of this recording may be used in political campaigns. All right, so that's the admonition we need to read. Okay, now let's switch over to Carol Savoy, who is going to be giving a perspective from the community. Go ahead, Carol, thanks much.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, and thank you, everybody, and appreciate the opportunity to present the community point of view of the Thoreau Business District. I'm Carol Savoy. I live at 61 Belknap Street, which is on the corner of Belknap and Thoreau, which is right behind Priest Cleaners. And I represent Save Thoreau, which is a group of Concord residents which are concerned with the Thoreau Depot business rezoning, otherwise known as Article 33. I'm just trying to advance my slides here. Thank you. So our point of view is some low density mixed use development may enhance the character of the Thoreau Business District, and you can have that today under current zoning. However, the proposed rezoning will allow for extreme development, which is inappropriate for the village. The proposed rezoning provides incentives to promote excessive development, and the public is not aware of the full implications of this. Our concerns about traffic, parking, congestion, excessive density, height, and open space exemptions have been ignored. We believe this will result in a substantial harm to the neighborhood, and the scale of this allowable development is not required by law. The community concerns are height, density, and scale. It incentivizes large development. There will be a loss of village character. It reduces affordable housing and open space. It will increase traffic in an already dangerous intersection. It will reduce parking and commuter parking. It will impact our schools, similar to when the Prescott apartments were built in the other part of town, which was supposed to be young professionals, singles, and seniors downsizing. And that what ended up happening is a lot of families with young children moved into the area, and that put a significant strain on our schools, and something similar could happen here. This will be a multi-year construction project nightmare, and the lack of two-way communication and feedback in our public comments have been ignored. So the objective of the Thoreau business rezoning is to incentivize development by changing the requirements to make it easier to build. So large mixed-use buildings cannot be built today because of the requirements related to parking, height, affordable housing, and open space. So if you vote no on Article 33, no large-scale development can happen because of the current zoning and these 4 requirements above. At the public hearing on the 8th, Diane Proctor asked the question, said, we need to understand what this zoning article does. I don't think it virtually guarantees there will be development in Thoreau Business District. Could you respond to that? And Burton Flint responded, I don't know if I'd go so far to say as we guarantee development. We would consider it a success if sooner rather than later, you started seeing mixed use development in the district. So the planning board has said this, they do not have zoning proposals, that do not have development proposals, and the zoning is not a development proposal. However, the zoning is to incent development. So if you change the zoning, it opens the floodgates to development in this area. I want to clarify design guidelines. Design guidelines are not law. They are not zoning. They are not voted on. They are only guidelines, and they are separate from zoning in Article 33. So you can have design guidelines without changing the zoning, and the design guidelines can apply to the current zoning. So when you're voting on Article 33, you are not voting for design guidelines. They are completely separate documents. And Burton showed this picture of these scary buildings that could be, potentially built under existing zoning today. And the fact is, under today's existing zoning, these buildings could not be built. And the reason why is the parking requirements are too high, the height requirements are too low, and the affordable housing and open space requirements are too high. So the Thoreau business rezoning is to incentivize development by changing requirements to make it easier to build. Want to make everybody aware that it is a 51% simple majority vote on Article 33. It is not a 2/3 majority vote. So if you care about the Thoreau Depot District, please bring your friends and family out to town meeting and vote no on Article 33. Want to talk about increased height. Now, this is an example of a 3-story building built by Nick Boynton out in West Concord at 95 Connick Street. So if the zoning passes, something similar, 3 stories, pitched roof, 38 feet or less, could be built all along Thoreau Street and all along Sudbury Street. So imagine what that would look like. Burton went over the increased height, saying that you can get up to a 45-foot pitched roof, but you have to put a 34-foot building in front of it to try and hide it. And it can't be within 125 feet of a residential district. And we'll talk about that in the Crosby's boundary change in a minute. But our concerns are it's too high, it's extreme massing, and you cannot shield a 45-foot building. It's just too big. And the town has been known for over accommodating special permits. Most of them always get approved. Article 33 is a special permit, and within Article 33, there are other special permits like this one. So it's a special permit within a special permit. The Thoreau Business District, Burton went over this, and basically it's 15 acres, but this area of Crosby's is 7 acres, and they're proposing hypothetically 63 units. And on one side of Thoreau Street, which is 2 acres, they are thinking about putting 32 units, which is even more dense. But the whole area is 15 acres. So potentially they could build above Starbucks and the nail salon and the hair salon, and over here in Concord Crossing and down this side of Sudbury Street as well. So right now we have a hypothetical build out of 95 new housing units, but it could be significantly more than that. So this is what the consultant proposed, 63 units in Crosby's, and they'd be like 3-story buildings along Sudbury Street. And then in the back here is what Burton referred to. You'd put the 4-story building that's 45 feet back there. And he talked about open space, and basically they're going to give us 15% of open space, but then again, it could be reduced by, there's the special permit again. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Now let's talk about affordable housing. So you're going to get 63 units in Crosby's, and 20% of that is 13 units, but only 7 of those are going to go to our 40B quota, and the 50 are going to be market rate. So I don't really think that's solving the affordable housing problem. And we'd also like to see, 20% towards 40B, because the more housing that you build, then your 40B gets kind of out of whack. This is the building on Thoreau Street from Dunkin' Donuts down to Karma. This is the Di Giovanni building. And this, they're proposing putting 24 units on about 1.37 acres. And you'll get only 3 40B here, and you'll get 19 units market rate. This is all hypothetical, obviously. But if you look here, you'll also see blue sky and trees. So this view will go away, and you'll see a 38-foot tall building here. The smallest unit right here is 0.25 acres, which is on Thoreau Street, and they'll only get 5 units there. 4 are going to be market rate and 1 affordable. And if you take a look here, you see blue sky and trees. You will not see that anymore, and you'll see a 38-foot building. We'll also have to tear down these buildings because they can't support that kind of weight. They're older. And our poor little rug store here could certainly use some love, but a little paint and a little landscaping and maybe some seating in here would certainly, spruce up the area without having to tear it down and build a 38-foot building. So the reduced open space that Burton was talking about, we get 15% here unless it's a special permit once again. And the special permit says that they can grant a special permit to satisfy all or part of the open space requirement through the provision of improving existing parks or improving access to existing parks or putting a walking trail within the district. So for example, if they choose to improve Emerson Park, they can do that in lieu of providing any open space in the Thoreau district. And our concern is we'd like to see 15% open space in the district if they're going to put 95 new housing units there, because you're going to have families with children and dogs and people who and bikes and all of that people want to recreate, and there will be nowhere for them to go. So they're all going to, descend upon Emerson Park, which is not that big to begin with. So we'd like to see the open space be retained in the Thoreau Business District. Now, traffic and parking, as we know, traffic is always an issue in the area. This is, if you haven't seen it, this is the Concord police even believe that there's an issue because they put the sign up on Thoreau Street. And it's a dangerous intersection. There's traffic and there's always accidents here. And if you put 95 new housing units with all the people that come along with that, it's just going to get worse. In regards to parking, I wanted to talk about this because they say, they're going to reduce the parking from 2 spots to 1 spot, but then they can reduce it even further if there's publicly available on-street parking along the building lot frontage on the same side of the street. So for example, there is parking on Thoreau Street today. It is metered and it's only 2 hours. There's no parking on Sudbury Street today. There's limited parking on Belknap and Middle. It's a 4-hour minimum. And on Grant Street, there is no parking. So if you reduce the parking and then you reduce it further, where are all these people going to park their cars? And if they have to park them there, they're going to have to move them every 2 hours because they've run out of their meter. Or they can have a shared parking agreement with adjacent properties that have offset peak demand time. So let's say, for example, Dunkin' Donuts is a very large parking lot, or the Mbta lot next to the Thoreau Depot is a large parking lot. So overnight, people could park there, but Dunkin' Donuts gets up at 5 in the morning and the parking lot starts to fill with commuters around 5 or 6 in the morning. So all those people are going to have to get up at 5 or 6 in the morning and move their cars, which really doesn't make sense. And then if you say, okay, let's them park in the lots overnight in the winter, well, you can't park in the parking lots overnight at winter because they spend all night plowing those parking lots, getting them ready for the businesses the next day. So this doesn't make sense either. So all of this parking, we just question, where is the parking for 95 new housing units at 1.5 parking spots, which 142 new parking spots needed, plus their guests, with the new and existing retail, plus the restaurants, plus the grocery shoppers, plus the diners, plus the workers, plus the 55 commuter spots in Crosby's we're most likely going to lose, and I'll talk about that in a minute, plus the service and delivery trucks to support the retail and the restaurants and the groceries, plus all the Amazon trucks with the home delivery of these new people, plus more garbage trucks, more dumpsters, and then you just put some snow on top of that, and the math just does not work. So the planning board has refused to incorporate feedback from longtime area residents who know about traffic and parking challenges. So commuter parking, Burton went over this about the boundary change, but let me explain the boundary change a little bit more. So it's this little striped triangle in yellow here is resident B, even though it is in the commercial lot of Crosby's. And these little dots mean it's Thoreau Business District. So right now, what they want to do is change this, as Burton showed you, and square it off. So right now, this is it within 125 feet of residential, you can't build to 45 feet. So because this is residential, that disallows them to build to 45 feet in this Crosby's lot. So what they want to do is square that off, and voila, now you can build to 45 feet and you can build along Sudbury Road because it's all commercial. So that is one of the main purposes of changing this lot line, our boundary. The other purpose of moving it, so we have 55 commuter parking spots here in Crosby's right now. And the reason that they were allowed is because the businesses here wanted to use this space as commercial, and it was residential. So the town said, okay, you give us commuter parking, we'll let you use this as commercial. So the minute that, and that is our leverage. So the minute that changes, the developer or the business owner doesn't have to do that anymore, right? And if a developer comes in and says, I want 63 new units and new retail and everything else they want to put in here, then they need parking for all of that. They are not going to want to give 55 commuter spots to the town of Concord because they don't have enough parking for all the new development that they just built. So most likely they will not, those 55 commuter spots will be gone. Now the planning board said that they will work with the developer, but the developer can develop with whatever they want within zoning, and there is no leverage, because we've lost it by moving the boundary to be able to provide commuter parking. So most likely that will be lost. Now I want to talk a bit about the village character. This is an example of a 4-story building that's in West Concord. It's a D. Giovanni building. It's called Warner Woods. So something similar to this could be built in Crosby's parking lot if this zoning is passed. And we just think it's too much, it's too dense, and it will change the historical village character forever. It ignores architecture, it ignores scale, and it ignores the sense of place. This neighborhood was home to Daniel Chester French, who was the world-renowned sculptor who sculpted the Minuteman that stands in Concord's Minuteman National Park. It was also home for the Thoreau Pencil Factory Lyceum. There are 19th century buildings here, such as Priest Cleaners and Concord Provisions. And the treescapes will be replaced with 38 to 45 foot wall of apartment buildings. So it creates an overall unappealing gateway to Concord. So what we have right now is, this is a Concord Provisions and a 19th century building. As you can see, we have blue sky and trees, and this will go away if they build a 38-foot building. And this will have to be all torn down because it cannot support the weight of that. So we lose those 19th century buildings and our village character are part of that. So would you rather have this or would you rather have that? This is potentially what can be built if we change the zoning. The Envision Plan, Burton talked a bit about the Envision Plan. It is not written in stone. It should be a rolling dynamic plan. It was written in 2018. Which was pre-COVID, and the world has changed since then. We have offered other potential sites and options, which have been ignored by the planning board, and the planning board's only answer to the Envision 2030 plan is to build the Thoreau Business District. The 2018 Envision Plan was contributed substantially by developer John Boynton, the clerk at the time, who also co-owns the building at 199 Sudbury Road, which is the red building at Crosby's Lot, which coincidentally happens to be part of the Thoreau Business District rezoning Article 33. This is from John Boynton's webpage. He was a very successful commercial real estate investor and developer all over the country, but now he is focusing on Concord and the greater Boston area. He's interested in looking at new acquisitions and joint ventures at the $1 to $10 million range, and he co-owns this red building right here in Crosby's parking lot, and he will benefit significantly if this zoning gets passed. And he also contributed substantially to the Envision Plan 2030. So in summary, the community concerns are excessive height, density, and scale. It incentivizes large development. There will be a loss of village character. It reduces affordable housing in open space. It will increase traffic in an already dangerous intersection. It reduces parking and commuter parking. It will impact our schools. It will be a multi-year construction project nightmare for everybody in town. The lack of two-way communication and feedback and our public comments have been ignored. And the Envision Plan 2030 heavily was influenced by a developer who co-owns 199 Sudbury Street in Crosby's Lot, which potentially could be a conflict of interest, and does call in us to look at the independence of the Envision Plan 2030. So what we want is reduced density by a minimum of 50%. We want to increase affordable housing. We want lower building heights, not 4 stories. We want 15% more of open space with outdoor seating in Thoreau Business District. We want no change to parking. We want to keep our 2 spots for 2 bedrooms. We want to retain the 55 commuter parking spots. We want community input into the design guidelines. We want improved landscaping and sustainability. We want development that preserves the village character. We want to support for our local businesses. And we want to protect the environment and the quality of life for all Concord residents. And many of these things can be achieved without rezoning. So thank you for your time and attention. If you for more information, you can visit our website at Save Thoreau. My contact information is below if you want to reach out to me directly. And now I'll pass it back to Carlin for question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. I appreciate that. I appreciate both speakers staying on time. That's excellent because that means it's more time for the audience to have questions. All right, Carol, why don't you go ahead and unshare your screen there, please?
Yeah, I'm trying. There we go. Sorry, I'm new to Zoom.
Perfect. There we go. Okay, what I'm going to do now is do 2 things. One, encourage folks to put questions in the chat. I know that we've got some discussion points being put in there, but we're also looking for questions. So please put questions in your chat. We'll take some hand raises in a moment. But first, I have a question for each of the speakers. And I'll start with Burton first, and then Carol. Burton, taking a step back, this is to promote the development of mixed use housing, right? And why is that important to Concord?
Why is it important to Concord? Well, I touched on some of the demographic changes that are happening, right? And overall, one of the issues that comes before the planning board on a regular basis is the combination of forces that have happened from development in our town. The tear down of 1950s capes and into much larger homes, and we've got what's called the missing middle, which is we have some affordable housing, we have some very nice homes, but what we don't have is homes that are of a size and price that are affordable by people who are in the middle of the income range, and people who might, maybe it's a 2 income household where you've got a police officer and a teacher making good money, but that's not good money to buy a house in Concord. So what we've looked at is how do you build housing that is more likely to be of a smaller size, which tends to be multifamily, that's affordable to people in that missing middle. How do you encourage development that is with sustainability in mind, using transit-oriented development? How do you improve the vibrancy of our village centers? by having people who are there in, but when you combine housing with businesses, you have people around the clock in your neighborhood. You have people there at night who live there, people at the day during the day frequenting businesses. Those are all things that we regularly hear from people wanting more of in our planning board hearings in the last 5.5 years I've been on the planning board. And we think that there are a lot of voices for that in town, as well as a real need for trying different things to create more affordable housing. Today, there's no affordable housing being created in this area, and under the current zoning guidelines for the overlay district. And we think that by changing the guidelines, reducing the amount of affordable that's required for projects under 10, that you're likely to actually see more affordable housing, and there's a real need in the community for that. I would point out that it's a very open question as to whether we will drop below the 10% threshold. We'll find out within days or weeks, maybe months, as to whether we are susceptible to a 40B project. And that could very well happen. And so there's a real need for affordable housing so that we have maintain control over our zoning as well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the answer. Carol, next question for you is slightly different. It's very clear that you do not want this to happen here. Is there a place in town where you think this kind of project could be reasonably done or should be reasonably done? So if not here, where?
And we do agree that we need more affordable housing in Concord, and we are for affordable housing. Some of the, I don't know how much more like retail we need. We have so many empty storefronts right now, and we're not really supporting our retailers. So our feeling is, it's really more about solving the housing problem. And some of the areas that I had mentioned, the planning board, I had provided a long list of some of the areas in the neighborhood. Right next to, across from Starbucks is the Road Gardens. That is already residential. There is a lot of space there. There are only 2 stories that, are older buildings that could be potentially redeveloped and made more housing there. And it's right in the downtown area. Everett Gardens, which is on Everett Street, is also, there's a lot of space, and they're older buildings that could be rehabbed and put, more appropriate and updated housing. We talked about the Welsh building down in Main Street in Concord Center, which is office space right next to the mill dam. That could be potentially mixed use, or that could be more residential than office space. It's a lot of empty offices there right now. And then in the vision plan, actually, I believe they also talk about, one of the potentials is Keys Road, which has all the town offices, to move those town offices to other town land and build that whole area, which is town property, into mixed use or residential. So those are some of the areas that I have mentioned to the planning board that, I think makes sense.
Thank you, Carol. That's food for thought. Okay, now, Diane, I'm about ready to turn it over to you so you can sort through all the comments that have put in the chat room. And before I do, I want to say to folks, please do give us your questions, put in the chat room if you can. And at some point, if you want to raise your hand, we'll take a couple of live questions. But for right now, let's go to the chat room with Diane Proctor. Go ahead, Diane.
Thank you so much, Carlin and Carol and Burton. The first question that was asked is all of this area on the sewer system in town?
I would have to defer to Elizabeth Hughes, our town planner, but I believe it is on the sewer system. But whether you can hook up to it with additional hookups that would be required would be part of a site plan review process because of the capacity constraints with the sewer plant right now.
Thank you. Janet Rothrock notes for everybody to look in the chat box. There is an article in Commonwealth Magazine, which she found very helpful, on the state programming that has to do with density around transportation hubs. She sent that to me a couple of days ago, and I've read it. It's very helpful. Stephen Newmeyer asks a question, and this is for you, Burton. One of the principles of smart growth is to encourage community and stakeholder collaboration in development decisions. Based over the last 6 months and what other people who attended the meetings over the last 3 years have told me, I find it hard to define what has happened as community collaboration. If this gets voted down 90% to 10%, like the proposed changes at Starbucks did last year, would the planning board adjust their zoning recommendations to match what the community prefers?
Well, that's I think everybody would admit, kind of a loaded question. In terms of community collaboration, this process started with a public forum where some 200 people came, and we started out by literally asking, what kind of designs do you want to see? What are the things you need in your community? What would you like? That became the basis of a set of principles. From the principles, we distilled that into specific guidelines that we wanted to implement into the zoning proposal. And we've done that. I will tell you that, for example, the design guidelines on the particular architectural styles that they're steering to, those aren't my preferences. In fact, I was the person that was manning the table at our original forum where we had different building designs on the up on a poster board, and people could put stickers on their preferred designs. I was pretty surprised what people chose. They weren't my first choices, but that is what we worked from it through this process. I think anytime you have a proposal like this, there will be some people that have views that they don't think are reflected in what's ultimately decided. But we think we have listened to the community. We think we've made some adjustments based upon some of the things that we've heard. And we think we started with a community-driven process. Compromise oftentimes is not a perfect thing where everybody's happy, but hopefully more of the people are more happy than less.
Thank you very much. Rather than create, this is from Janet Rothrock, rather than create more business opportunities for developers, couldn't we alter our zoning to allow more big homes to be converted into multifamily dwellings?
Mm-hmm. Shall I take a shot at that first?
Okay.
Well, so we're sort of doing all of the above, right? Some of the things that the planning board has proposed and gotten passed through town meeting recently is the ability to build accessory dwelling units, and by right, so that people are able to, who are in large homes, who might want to downsize into, for example, a traditional in-laws suite or a garage apartment, are now able to do that in different districts in town. We also have allowed in residency the ability to create two-family homes, and we're starting to see those happen increasingly. Before the ZBA, there are two-family proposals. So we are doing that as well. But we're trying to do a little bit of take a multifaceted approach.
And that certainly was part of the town meeting last year, as you suggest. Tricia Hott asked, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name, Tricia. Agree that parking and traffic is a major concern. Is there a compromise on the rezoning? Could we rezone, for instance, Crosby's area, but not Thoreau Street? Or if you're concording, Thoreau Street.
Well, we have distinguished between Sudbury and Thoreau in terms of the dimensional requirements, and it's having a primary street and a secondary street with somewhat different requirements. And with respect to limiting the existing ability to get a special permit for increased height, that's limited essentially to the Crosby's lot. With respect to parking, I want to emphasize that, and traffic. When a project is proposed, it goes through a site plan review by the planning board, and there may be other, they may even within the as-right provisions of this proposal, they may be going to the ZBA for different things, or the planning board for different approvals. But there's certainly a site plan review, and parking and traffic studies are done as part of that. And when you look at the use of a parcel like Crosby's, the current commercial use, and what would happen with respect to the increase in parking and traffic demands if you were to add in residential. There are manuals on this thing. The civil engineers use. There's the ITE manual. That using that manual, currently the Crosby's marketplace generates an estimated 1,500 trips per day based upon the size and the commercial use. adding 60 residential units, which I think was the hypothetical maximum build out, or roughly in that range, would be estimated to add another 200 trips spread out throughout the day. So that's what is about 13% additional cars. So while there may be, this proposal could allow for a significant increase in residential density, the primary driver of traffic and parking tends to be those commercial uses that are in the district today.
Thank you. Carol, did you want to say anything about, raise your hand or do something if you also wish to comment on any of these questions?
Okay, yeah, no, I'm good so far. I think Burton's doing an excellent job.
He sure does. Here's another question, Burton, and this is from David Collis. The entire presentation by the planning board concerns design. Where do the economics for the developers figure into the proposal? The suggestion is that it is uneconomic to put mixed-use development in place given the current zoning. That has not been demonstrated, but more importantly, we do not know if the proposal transfers millions of dollars to landowners as we concede, maybe the word is concede, far too much to them as an incentive to build. Mr. Burton states that the current open space requirement likely makes mixed use infeasible, but frankly, he does not know whether there would be mixed use development under the new zoning. Where is the economic analysis that shows how much of an incentive it needs to be offered developers to get them to build mixed use building? I know these are tough questions, but I'm reading them exactly because I don't want to misinterpret in some way. So,
I mean, if I may, the elevator version of that is, where's the economic analysis that shows this proposal is worth a hill of beans and it will have any effect? So another, yeah, so important thing to note. The planning board, we're made up of volunteers. I'm not a planning professional. I'm doing it as a town volunteer. Who do we rely on when we come up with these proposals? We have excellent town staff and town planner with decades of experience. And we also, in this case, relied on the Metropolitan Area Planning Council's a professional consultant who is an expert in looking at zoning in towns and seeing what are the impediments to mixed use transit-oriented development, and what has shown success, what changes have successfully driven change on the ground, what changes to the zoning code. So we did rely on an outside consultant. Did we go through spreadsheets of numbers and economic analysis in terms of cost per square foot or the like? No, we did not. But I can tell you that I have seen in real terms proposals in town where there was a proposal that was for 7 units of housing in a planned residential development, and the neighborhood pushed that down. And once it got below 6 units, the developer just chopped it to 4. And the reason being because adding 1 unit of affordable housing, which would have been required under those circumstances, was not. They were better off building fewer houses, even though they had the room for more, and the neighborhood was okay with more. But they didn't want the 7. So there's a tipping point for economic infeasibility there that we've seen in real terms. And in terms of what's the amount of incentive you need to provide to developer or transferring millions of dollars, that implies that we're providing a tax subsidy or other economic direct incentive. And certainly, like I said a couple of times in my presentation, the intent here is to make it more likely that mixed use with housing is developed. So we want to remove impediments. I don't know that we're really transferring millions of dollars of value to landowners, but we are making, hopefully removing impediments to that kind of development.
Thank you. Mary Taylor wonders if the whole area in question isn't wetlands. And in Burton, there are lots of questions about traffic, and I think the traffic density is one that I keep seeing over and over again in the comment area. Go ahead about the wetlands, please.
Well, there is some wetlands near the Crosby's lot. Any development that would happen would need to be in accordance with the rules around the 100-year floodplain, which that gets changed periodically where that floodplain exists, and there would need to be a modern stormwater analysis and mitigation for any runoffs and the like. The fact of the matter is today, it's hard, virtually the entire district is hardscape. It's building roofs or parking lots, and that's because it's commercial. There's no requirement for open space today in the district, with the one exception of the Crosby's Crossing, which was built on the lumberyard property, or Concord Crossing, excuse me. But today, with respect to runoff water issues, you just look at an aerial picture and you'll understand that it's not such a great setup as it exists today.
Thank you. There was one person asks, and this is a commonly posed question, but I think clarifying it is helpful. What total income qualifies as low income? Really, the question is, what is affordable? And there are two definitions of affordable in Concord: affordable and affordable. Can you give an income cutoff, or at least some guidelines for people who may not be familiar with those?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what the formula is. I can't give you the exact dollar. So it's 80% of AMI, which stands for area median income, is capital A, affordable, for the subsidized housing inventory. And then there is sort of the missing middle, affordable, of 120, I think it's 110 to 140% of AMI. Those numbers actually seem relatively high if you look at them. That second calculation is certainly a six-figure income, but I can't give you a specific number. That's the calculation that the state uses, and it's designed to be flexible, change over time as incomes increase, and based upon your particular area.
And Jane Fisher asks an important question. Burton showed a picture of 4 buildings that could be built under current zoning. Carol showed the same picture and said they couldn't be built under current zoning. Can anyone reconcile that difference?
Well, I can say that if they included housing and were subject to the combined business residential rule as it exists today, you're right, they likely couldn't be built because there wouldn't be enough room on the lot for the amount of open space that would need to be set aside. If they were commercial buildings, they could be built, assuming that there was sufficient parking. Having the parking out front, as was depicted, the height. I want to emphasize that the height limits today are 35 feet, but that's based upon, if you've got a pitched roof, this is the 35-foot mark, right? So you can be up significantly higher. And you can go to 40 feet with a special permit. The height limits we're proposing is 35 feet for a flat roof, 38 feet for a pitched roof. So today you could build a commercial building in the district with a flat roof that's 35 feet tall. I think Carol and I would probably have a different viewpoint on whether it would be economically feasible to build a commercial building of those dimensions today, and perhaps Carol would prefer to see it remain out of reach so that you wouldn't see a greater height. And I'm completely open in saying, well, we do want to see mixed use, and that may necessitate multi-story buildings up to the height limit we're proposing, where today there's one floor. I'm not going to say that that's not a possibility. That's a goal.
Diane, I'd like to have Carol get a chance to respond if she wants to, and then I'm going to take one of the raised hand questions, and then we'll come back to the chat, okay? Okay, Carol, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. And so I think what Burton said is that basically it could not be built today because of the restrictions that I mentioned before, right? The open space and, the height of the building. So given those restrictions in the current zoning, you cannot have a building that high, particularly for residential, and commercial. They'd have to have adequate parking, right? And that are the two kind of constraints for the two buildings, which is why you can't currently build something to that height today.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's turn very quickly to, we've got a raised hand. Tanya, go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, it is a little nitpicky, but about the development project that Burton mentioned, which was 7 units and then went down to 4. I think the reason it went down to 4, as I remember, was because the town's engineers agreed with the public's concerns that the water table issues would not be resolved. So I think most of the residents were more concerned about preserving trees and otherwise they would have been okay with having affordable housing there and have 6 smaller units. I think it was a sewage problem. That's how I remember it. And then I put a note in the chat about the Envision Concord plan, and I needn't repeat that. Anybody can see it if they want. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure I heard a question there, but I appreciate the comment. That's great. All right, Diane, I'm going to send it back to you and the chat room. Go ahead.
Thank you, Carolyn. One of the questions, one person is questioning in several different ways, the question about Concord sustainability goals as passed in recent years. And just our general feeling that we want to incentivize as often as possible a reduction in carbon and a community that is perhaps producing less stress on our environment. To what degree did you take that into consideration and did your committee take that into consideration when proposing this plan?
Great question. Thank you. And thank you. I presume that Pamela, who challenges us on that regularly at the planning board in terms of what we're doing to advance the sustainability goals that have been expressed through various articles in town meeting.
Precisely.
Yeah. So in the first instance, the idea is why are we proposing it for this district? And it's as simple as that's where the train station is, right? That's historically where there, you have access to public transit, which is less of an impact. With respect to weaving into the zoning specific requirements for sustainability, other than encouraging what we intend to be more of a more walkability and a neighborhood where people are less likely to get into their cars. We are always balancing many factors when we look at different proposals in terms of achieving different town goals. With respect to sustainability, how does that get reflected here? Well, if a parcel is developed within here, it would go through a site plan review process, and the planning board has recently added sustainability principles and to our review process in the site plan process. So that's not directly part of of this new zoning here, but it would come into the process when any particular project was proposed. Those factors would play into it.
Thank you very much. We have a comment from Elizabeth Henry, who confesses right from the beginning. I don't have a question, but I wanted to comment in support of the zoning changes. I live around the corner on Hubbard Street and would be directly impacted by these changes. However, my view is that we are facing a climate crisis, and we also have a chronic shortage of housing production and a lack of housing in the range for lower and middle income buyers. Walkable, transit-oriented, multifamily housing like this has a far lower environmental footprint than single-family homes on private lots. It also makes it feasible for a broader range of people to call Concord home. So thank you, Elizabeth, for that comment. There have been a lot of comments that I've heard around town, Burton, about, and Carol, about the law and the state law. And there's a very specific question that says, how does the MBTA transportation zone bill factor into the plan? The bill stipulates a half-mile radius zoning area from the depot. It also effectively doubles the Section 40B requirement for affordable housing. This is from Vince. I think he knows of which he speaks. DHCD has issued preliminary guidelines. Final guidelines will almost certainly include the half-mile radius in Section 40B equivalent requirements. That's a very technical question, and I wonder if you can address that now, or you wish to address it offline later.
Oh, I know. I'm happy to address it now, and I'm glad it was raised, because I think a lot of people have thought, well, is this Concord's response to what's called the Mbta Communities Act, which is an act that is essentially requiring each community that has an MBTA stop in it to create a zoning district that in many respects is kind of like what we're proposing, create a denser walkable area around an MBTA stop that would allow mixed use development with housing. So a lot of people thought that what we're doing, especially people that came into this process a little later on, was in response to that Mbta Communities Act process. I want to emphasize that that's not the case. And honestly, in our deliberations as a planning board, didn't really play into it all that much, because this process kicked off before the Mbta Communities Act was drafted, proposed, signed into law. And we began working on it. Our lens on working on this was the 2020 long range plan. It was not 2030 long range plan, excuse me. It was not the Communities Act. I think this act, this proposal, I think is, I would argue, and Carol and I differ here, that it was a modest proposal. It's a relatively small area, and the density that's potentially allowed here is an increase, but not a drastic increase. The MBTA's Community Act, the draft guidance that they published would suggest a significantly more, a proposal that would be significantly more challenging to get adopted in Concord. And to be clear, that's what would need to happen. A proposal would need to be made and accepted by a zoning change would need to be made through town meeting. I don't think that's likely to happen. I wrote a letter to the DHCD and all the powers that be, including the governor, as chair boards do, raising specific issues with the MBTA Communities Act and suggesting that it is not a fit for Concord. I don't think you'd ever see zoning articles that met the requirements of those draft guidelines pass in Concord. The consequences of not meeting the Communities Act as originally drafted was that you lose out on a couple of housing programs and development programs. The draft guidelines suggest that may be expanded to other programs, which is also one of the points I took issue with. But I think it would be more likely that the town of Concord would not come into compliance with that act. So what do we do in the alternative? And this is what we're proposing in response to the locally developed long range plan.
And one of the things that Janet Rothrock in that article that was mentioned earlier when we were just beginning response to questions does address some of those issues.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, Carol.
Yes, if I may, I'd like to just add a comment to that. On the MBTA Community Act, I think they originally did not specify, or the acreage was smaller, but the revised Community Act right now, I believe, calls for the area to be 50 acres of land, and this is Thoreau Depot is only 15 acres of land. So I know the planning board looked at this and responded to the, and Burton said he wrote a letter. One of the things they suggested is if they have, potentially we could meet the requirement if you, include, expand the scope of it and also include West Concord. So West Concord around the train station plus Thoreau Depot around the train station, you could cobble together the 50 acres. So that was one of the things in the response. And the town of Lincoln also, looked at those requirements and wrote a long letter to the, I guess the MBTA or the state agency, just saying how that would be detrimental to the town because, there's not 50 acres around their train station. And then the town of Concord, Burton, and the planning board, as well as the select board, did respond to that and sent that to the government. So one of the reasons why we can't comply is the acreage, the sheer acreage is just too much in Concord, unless you take the two areas and expand it a little bit.
Thank you so much. Stephen Newmeyer asks a double-edged or two-sided, not double-edged, but two parts of a question. If 200 people show up to give community feedback out of 13,500 voters, are you concerned that the community feedback you are getting might differ from the other 13,300 voters? And that's part one. And part two, does the MAPC have an agenda that may conflict with our community's preferences? And you may not know, but if you do.
Would you like me to take that question?
Sure. Thank you.
So with respect to the MAPC, I think that they do have an agenda, which is to help communities create mixed-use housing, mixed-use development, and facilitate that happening in more communities in the greater Boston area. I think that they bring a certain approach and suggestions on doing that, and we spent 2 years refining that at the local level with the planning board and community input. With respect to will 200 people that show up at I guess you said,
It says
My
200
concern,
people show up at a planning board meeting.
yeah, if they show up, if that's different, if that would be different than what maybe the 1,300 people that might show up at town meeting.
13,000.
Um, gosh, I think the people that tend to come to the, I mean, we've had some quite impressive turnout at some of these public forums and public hearings we've had that exceeded, what I've seen previously. I think that nonetheless, you tend to have the people that are very personally interested in issues show up at things like, planning board meetings late at night on every other Tuesday, as opposed to the people that show up and vote at town meeting. And I don't know the implication as if there's a difference there, other than to say, ultimately we've got to propose something that town meeting likes as a cross section of our entire town. And if they don't, and they vote it down, I won't take it personally. My job as the chair of the planning board is to take the recommendations from the long range plan, work with the town professional staff, and put together a proposal that I think is, makes sense, working with other members of the board and through the iterative public feedback process. If the impression we've had of what the town wants through the planning board meeting and our public forums is woefully out of whack with what the town preferences showed at town meeting, so be it. If I suspect, because a lot of people who have come to our hearings and public forums have raised questions and concerns and are clearly in opposition. I also hear from a lot of people outside of that process who, or we've received letters and things, people who are really interested in issues like affordable housing and that missing middle housing. And that some of them are in the neighborhood, who are the people who I think typically come to our forums, and some of them are across town. And that's a cross town issue that might get, might have a resonate differently at town meeting.
Well, I don't think you can live in this world right now with anybody who's looking for housing or an apartment and not realize how tight the housing market is for people who don't have just scads of money to overbid whatever the asking price is.
Diane, I just want to do a quick time check. We have a little less than 10 minutes left for this program. And I see we have one hand raised up. So what I'd like to do is go to the hand that's raised and then let you take one, maybe two more chat questions, and then we'll do the wind. Okay. Okay. Let's go to the hand raise. That's Suzanne Foley. Suzanne, you have a question. Go ahead. And you're on mute still, my dear. Suzanne, you're still on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I live in the one house that's next to Crosby's. I will be the person most affected by the changes in Crosby's market. When we were talking about community collaboration, I think it's important for people to know not one person from the planning board reached out to me to ask me about significant changes that are happening within 125 feet of my home. I am not against progress. I agree that the whole area could look a lot better than what it does. But I want people to know that there are no guarantees with this zoning change. The only thing that's being guaranteed is that there will be a zoning change. These design guidelines are completely flexible. They can be completely changed. A developer with special permit can come in and offer anything else they want to. I resent having a 4-story building built next to my home with a special permit. There are no limits to say how many 4-story buildings they can build in the area. So I think this is a case of overdevelopment. Yes, we need affordable homes. Yes, I know this looks like a strip mall next to Crosby's. It's not very attractive. But 4-story buildings next to my house, peeking into my backyard, lights everywhere, dogs, it's just too much for the area. So can we just have smaller development that's smart and fits in with the area? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Diane, I just wanted to take one more chat question because the speakers still need to do their 2-minute wrap-ups. Okay, go ahead, Diane.
Thank you, Carlin. Bob Treitman asks, Burton, can you clarify exactly what the agreement is with the Crosby's landlord to provide commuter parking? If the property is sold regardless of this zoning change, is the buyer obligated to provide the parking?
Nope.
And others have said and added on, just as we talked about parking and density. If not, are all of our side streets going to be, filled with the people that need to use that for commuter parking as we move from a COVID world to a regular world?
So the change of ownership wouldn't change the agreement. There was, as part of a special permit to allow the development of that lot, the owners of the Crosby's parcel, which is Stop and Shop, wanted to be able to have the commuters. My understanding, I wasn't around in the 70s when I believe this agreement was originally put together, was that they wanted to have commuter parking over, near their store, and they created that, and then there's a lease agreement with the town, which is renewed on an annual basis, that covers, I believe, essentially insurance, and so the town can charge fees for those commuter spaces. A change in ownership wouldn't change that. The lease agreement might change, but not the requirement for the parking. Change in use might, right? If the property was redeveloped, and so if there was a change in use so that they were building something different that either needed a special permit or was it by right and was going through the site plan review process, there could be reconsideration of that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's do the wrap up. And I want to note that we've had up to 61 people on this call today. 61 is a lot of folks, and I appreciate that. Okay, Burton, we're going to give you 2 minutes. Are you ready?
Gosh, yeah, I'd forgotten part of the format was a 2-minute wrap up, but I guess just to make a couple closing points. We've heard a lot from people through this planning process, and I'll highlight the concerns that we've heard. We've heard about traffic, height, and density, and parking concerns. What will those things do? I mentioned that traffic is largely driven by commercial uses. Residential uses add, yes, to it, but it is a small percentage compared to the same amount of space taken up by commercial. With respect to, it's important to remember that this is a proposal to change the zoning. It's not any particular project. We're not proposing 60 units on Crosby's or 38 on Thoreau. We're proposing a zoning that, under many different owners over time, maybe 1 year, maybe 5, maybe 50 years, these things could be developed incrementally, and there could be change that would be much more likely that it would result in projects that in the aggregate add up to a smaller number than that. And any one of those proposals would have to go through a planning and site plan review process where traffic is looked at, and where parking requirements are needed. The idea that we would allow shared parking between a use where the use shifts at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a bank that's 9 to 5 and a restaurant that opens at for dinner in the evenings. Those kinds of shared things between parking. But each of those gets looked at on a project by project basis. There's a real desire that's been expressed within town for more affordable housing, mixed use development near our transit centers. And we think we've done a diligent job over the last 3 years developing this for people's consideration. Thanks.
Thank you, Burton. All right, Carol, it's your turn. Please proceed.
Sorry, I wanted to just share my screen if I may. So some low density mixed use may enhance the character of the Thoreau Business District, and you can do that today with current zoning. However, the proposed rezoning will allow for extreme development, which is inappropriate for the village. The excessive height, density, and scale will create an urban city block within the downtown Concord area. It will greatly increase traffic, congestion, and rush hour bottlenecks. Inadequate parking and commuter parking will create spillover on our side streets and into downtown Concord parking lots. The stress on our schools with 95 new housing units and families moving in, the strain of new competition and raised rent on our local merchants may drive them out of town or out of business altogether. Our taxes will increase because the support of the infrastructure upgrades needed for any development in the area, because the water and sewer systems are at their limit, and anything that is going to be developed, the developer is not going to bear the cost of that. So that's going to become on the town of Concord, which means it's going to increase our taxes. It will change the historical Thoreau village character forever. And we can have design guidelines now without rezoning, and we can spruce up the Thoreau Village and Crosby area now without rezoning. So please vote no on Article 33, because once gone, it will be forever lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. Okay, folks, appreciate your attending this program. We have a couple announcements first before we let you go. Don't forget that April 12th, we have the town elections, and on May 1 is town meeting. And Stefan Bader, are you still on the call? Because I was wondering if you might like to give us an update on the April 24th spring program.
I am still on the call, and I will first observe that for folks who did not come to the last special election on the middle school, you should check and see if you have a new polling place. If the last time you voted was more than a year ago, you might find that you have to go to a new polling place. So I'll put that out there. Yes, the League of Women Voters is planning an event on April 24th. It is a hybrid event. The first part is in person at the Concord Museum. If you are a League member, you will get an invitation via Monday Member News. If you're not subscribed to that, you should be. If you are a League member, you will get a postcard letting you know about it. If you're not a League member, consider this my pitch to strongly urge you to join the League. The event will feature the author of the book that Diane is holding up there, Paradise Falls, and his name is Keith O'Brien. Paradise Falls is the story of the women in Buffalo who organized and brought to light the issues with the Love Canal back in the 1970s. Keith will be coming to Concord in person. And if you would like to join us at the museum for a brief in-person festivities before his talk, which will begin at 7 o'clock, and the talk will be accessible in person at the museum and on Zoom. So there are more details to come, but that's the big picture. That's the teaser. That's the incentive to sign up and watch your email, watch your postcards. And if you're not a League member, please join the League and you'll get this sort of information routinely.
Great. That's the big event coming up. Okay. I'm going to do one more sentence or two, then I'm going to turn over to Diane to close out the program. Please remember this meeting has been recorded and is the property of the League. No part of this recording may be used in political campaigns. And when it's aired, posted, or otherwise distributed, the recording must be presented in its entirety. All right. This program can also be viewed or will be viewed on the League's website and will be posted on the town's Minutemen Media Network YouTube channel. So you'll be able to see it and let your friends know that, hey, there's a really good program about Article 33. Go there and watch. Okay, that's all that I have. Diane, back over to you for closing. Thank you all.
Carolyn, thank you for moderating it so skillfully and so thoughtfully. You should also know that you can go to the League website and click under First Fridays and see all the past warrant review discussions. For those of you who are curious about other warrant articles than number 33, you'll get rather substantive discussions that can help you to make the decisions you need to make as we go forward as voters in our community. At the middle school, we only had 18% of our community come out to vote for what was singularly the largest amount of money we've ever chosen to spend as a town on any one project. So let us hope that we can up that average this time around in terms of our voting. Even though the positions are uncontested, our presence makes a difference. So Carol, Burton, thank you so much. Stefan, for your advertisement for the League, reminding us all that if it were not for the League, these kinds of things probably wouldn't happen. And Carlin, who really not only moderated this, but is the wizard who does so much of what makes our experiences in the League both public and successful. And let us not forget the people behind the screen. Julie Rowan, Linda Ziffern, and Peggy Wargelin, who have made all of this technically work so really flawlessly. Thank you all for attending. Join the league, be part of our community, stay informed, and vote. Thank you very much.